Hello, my name is Ethan Chazen. I am a New York City-based small business development coach. And if you've ever come to my YouTube channel before, you know that I often shine a light on companies and amazing cultures and great business practices and treating employees with respect and civility. But I also like to point out cautionary tales of businesses that may be approaching business from a questionable ethical perspective. So today is a story of a tech company, a US tech company that started out with supposedly the best of intentions, a great moral compass, and supposedly ethical construct. But over the years that it's been in existence, exhibited some questionable business practices. So today's story is about a gentleman by the name of Todd Weaver and a company called Purism, and they manufacture, supposedly are the only US manufacturer of smartphones. And so we're going to dive into today's video. So let's start out with a discussion of their business practices. I'm going to share with you a story about Purism. And bear with me one second. I just want to ramp up some news coverage. So let's start with Fortune magazine. This is as of this week, June 5th, 2025. The only made in America smartphone maker has a message for Apple about manufacturing smartphones in the Trump tariff era. So Todd Weaver has an important message. He's the founder of Purism. He has an important message for Apple as Apple faces growing demands being placed on it by President Donald Trump to reshore some of Apple's smartphone production. Todd Weaver's advice to Apple: don't listen to conventional wisdom. Experts have long said that manufacturing of Apple's iPhone in the US rather than Asia, as Apple does, would be logistically impossible and ridiculously expensive. But Todd Weaver argues that companies can indeed do it successfully and at a similar, only slightly higher cost if these companies are given several years to navigate inevitable complications. So Weaver should know his startup, Purism, is among the few, if not the only businesses that assemble smartphones in the US. In fact, the US pedigree is the main selling point of Purism's Made in America device, which is called the Liberty phone. It's challenging to do this in the US, Weaver acknowledges. It's probably the reason I'm the only one. And yet he says his company has managed to make it work. We're going to get into that. And has been profitable. We're going to get into that for the last 2 years. A real world example of what's possible on a hot button topic in which political talking points and vested interests often dominate. So, as I said to start out today's video, there is an ideology, a methodology behind Purism's business intent, started by Todd Weaver. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to play a video for you. I'm going to watch a few minutes, and I'd like you to get a sense of what the Purism, their smartphone called the Librem 5, is all about. So just to kind of walk you through this, Purism as a company was started as a hardware company. So Todd Weaver had a very clear vision of how he wanted to progress the development of the company. Started out making hardware, then software, operating system, and then eventually pivot towards smartphone manufacturing. So that was kind of the business impetus.
Purism offers a range of consumer electronics, including which costs it's the only part.
So the Made in the USA designation is a pretty important unique value proposition, right? Purism, the only American company to make smartphones. You can question that word make, since the chassis and the Wi-Fi card come from elsewhere. So really, it's more accurate to say they are the only US assembler of smartphones. But regardless, they have been approved by the US federal government, that distinction of being the only US manufacturer of smartphones. So again, Purism is an American company founded by Todd Weaver. The initial intent was to start out, he's a software developer, he's a tech guy. The intent was to manufacture US manufacture smartphone technology. So it started out on the hardware, pivoted to software, moved into the operating system domain, and ultimately that led to smartphone technology, smartphone component part acquisition and assembly of smartphones here in the US, and also the obtaining of a very favorable distinction of being the only US-based manufacturer of smartphone technology. But I'm not here talking about technology. I'm not a technology person. I'm a business person. So I want to talk about what this has meant, this being Purism's approach to business. So back to Weaver. It's challenging to make smartphones in the US, he acknowledged. It's probably the reason I'm the only one. And yet he says his company has managed to make it work and has been profitable and a real world example of what's possible on a hot button topic. So I want to get into this whole notion of what it's actually meant, Purism and this American US manufacturer of smartphone technology. So President Donald Trump recently put US smartphone production in the spotlight as part of his global trade war. On May 23rd, he used social network Truth Social to publicly attack Apple, and you may be aware of this if you've been paying attention, for importing its iPhones into the US rather than making them domestically, and then threaten the company with a 25% tariff if it continued to do so. Whether any of the import taxes will be permanent is unclear, given Trump's whiplash decision-making in court challenges by other third parties. So this is the backstory. But still, Apple has long assembled its iPhones overseas, mainly in China, and has resisted relocating any of that production to the US. In April, when Trump announced its tariffs, Apple went so far as to shift the sourcing of most US-bound iPhones from China to India. India, because it faced lower import taxes, Apple did in India. US assembly was never publicly mentioned as a possibility. In the past, Apple CEO Tim Cook explained the reluctance by saying the abundance of skilled labor and top-notch suppliers overseas would be difficult to reproduce at home. So Weaver, Todd Weaver's company, Purism, isn't Apple. Apple sold more than 2 billion iPhones globally since introducing its first models back in 2007. The devices unleashed a new era in the tech industry in which mobile devices became the focus. So I'm going to put that aside for a minute. I want to get to why I'm making this video for you as a cautionary tale. So let's go back in time. Purism starts to send out pre-orders, allow people to purchase its Librem 5 back in 2017. So we're going back 8 years. Well, 7.5 years to October of 2019. So this is a gentleman by the name of Jay Little, who's written extensively about Purism and Todd Weaver. And he says, today I'm going to tell you a sad tale of a device called the Librem 5 and the company behind it, Purism. So this is going back to 2019. Right now, the story doesn't have a happy ending. I'm writing a series of articles as a protest against Purism and Todd Weaver's business practices and behavior, a company which claims that transparency and openness are their core values. If they won't tell the world the truth about the Librem 5, then I'm willing to at least give it a go. Okay, so again, if you've watched my many other videos on my YouTube channel, I talked about first and foremost an organization, if it wants to build an amazing workplace culture, it starts out with its vision, mission, and core values. And apparently, the core values that Todd Weaver espoused in starting Purism didn't bear out in the light of day. So last month, this is Jay Little. Last month, I promised a blog about low-powered computing and my progress trying to adapt my small service. He goes back and he's a tech guy, and he talks about his experience with Purism and trying to post positive success stories about his experience with Purism's laptop, Pinebook Pro. So Purism, as I mentioned before, didn't initially start out wanting to go into smartphone manufacturing. It started out with hardware, with laptops and the Pinebook Pro, and moved to software and operating systems and then smartphone technology. So Purism's goal was to introduce a low-powered computing initiative. So this tech blogger, Jay Little, talks about his many challenges with Purism. So he says, a lot of you probably don't know who Purism is. Purism is essentially a tech company, produces FOSS-compliant hardware powered by FOSS-compliant software. So he says regular readers of his blog knows that he owns one of their laptops, the Librem 15, and he's been pleased with it. And he talks a little bit about Purism's other technology. So it all started in early September of 2019 when Purism announced that they were going to ship the Librem 5 smartphones to people who financially backed their initiative. So they start taking advance orders back in 2017. They didn't begin fulfilling until 2023. And even then, so we're talking about years and years and years of them taking orders, taking payment, and then not delivering on those pre-orders, and refusing to give refunds when people who understandably were upset said, hey, where's my money? So they take these pre-orders. What's the problem with that? Not a single backer had received an email or any notification, any communication from Purism from when they first started taking orders in 2017 to 2018 to 2019. So when you go into Purism's forums online, there are people who got very upset because they like the idea of an American company making tech, making products, offering to do so because their core values were to democratize technology. If you go back and you read supposedly the impetus that led Todd Weaver to form Purism, it was because he had two daughters And he felt that when they grew up, he saw what was happening in the tech world with the monopolies and them gathering information, often with questionable intent, questionable business practices to gather information on young people to use and making them more addicted to their products and the technology. So supposedly, Todd Weaver launched Purism to counter this. Okay. Years after they formed, and then years after they started to claim that they were going to produce smartphones, they only started to make a relatively few. One belonged to the chairman of the board of directors of Purism, and you never see the products used in any of their promotional videos, like the video I was showing you previously. And Purism kept saying, be on the lookout, be on the lookout. And they kept making promotional videos and marketing materials to say, hey, we're coming out with this new iPhone, distinction of being the only US manufacturer of smartphone, and still no products were launched. So if you go into Reddit and you check out what people who are in the tech field and have been studying and waiting for their products and analyzing Purism, it's not good. So you go back to 2022. Genuine question, WTF is up with Purism? They've clearly made actual devices. Devices are what they claim they are. They've contributed code to the Linux community. They've shipped a few devices. They seemingly do have people responding to emails that are sent into the company. But at the same time, there appears to be zero transparency. Shipping can take years if you get them at all. Refunds are impossible to get from the company. They're continually jacking up the price for their hardware. They have all the hallmarks of a scam, yet they put in all the work of an actual company, designing the product, making the product, selling the product, shipping the product. It isn't cheap, their products. Again, part of the appeal to being a US-based manufacturer is having a relatively more expensive labor market than other comparable labor markets in other countries, China, India of note. So they're going to have to pass on the increased price, Purism, to its customers. So I honestly just do not understand this company. Does anyone know why they're like this? Is it some language barrier thing where they literally can't communicate with the people talking about buying and complaining about their products? I just don't see how you can put in all the work and costs of an actual company and still be this blind or intentionally silent on the major issues. So there goes into, on this Reddit thread, it goes into a number of people who are in the tech and the tech engineering and R&D space, talking about the challenges and talking about, in general, the issues with manufacturing technology in the US. So Synchronius 3 years ago wrote, how about over-optimism? And they put all these links to all these stories and a reluctance to communicate delays and setbacks. When things don't go to plan, it feels safer to stop communicating. So these are classic hallmarks of challenges that organizations face. So Purism's problems purely boil down to trust and false promises. So this is going back to the end of October 2019. Roy Shestowitz in a techrights.org post. Just to read a piece of this about Purism. A promising, potentially exciting, freedom-respecting set of products would be easier to talk about than actually deliver. We take a look at what goes on at Purism. It's a particularly difficult subject for me to write about, having spent a number of years cheering for Librem, their smartphone, in its various forms or form factors, and by extension, the parent company Purism, whose goals I believe to be well-intentioned. They're sort of privacy first, freedom at the forefront company, freedom as in a software freedom as well as hardware freedom to the limited extent possible. So lately, I've been reading negative things about Purism. I've also received messages and mail about it. I'm committed to software freedom, but I am also deeply committed to truth. So let's put right there on the table the knowns, unknowns, and what's in desperate need of verification. Because transparency is needed for true trust. There's the lesson for all of you business owners and entrepreneurs and startups and executives. Otherwise, all of this is fantasy. Here in Tech Rights, they talk about their transparency objectives and their benchmarks that serve to reveal operations behind the scenes too. We're balancing both privacy considerations and full transparency in the name of source protection, software, and coding. We redact some things, blah, blah, blah. Okay, purism is different. The company isn't always upfront. Sometimes it's not even honest, and some would say misleading. I'd like to believe they're not intentionally misleading people, but over the past month, this is October 2022, there has been more evidence to that effect. Are they dishonest for the greater good? I don't know. Some companies pretend to do better than they really do, hoping for a sort of self-fulfillment prophecy effect, inertia, built atop an illusion. I get that. I don't respect that, but I totally get that. It's quite common, and many large companies like Microsoft do this. Many companies operate at a loss and or have massive debt. They don't like to talk about those things. It might scare away those who subsidize and invest in them. So that's the other thing. Questionable business practices at Purism, no refunds given to people who placed pre-orders and never got their products in their possession, heavy debt, dire financial situation. The company kept going back, Todd Weaver, to ask investors for additional funding, lack of transparency. All of this is at the heart of business practice. So those of you who watch my videos know that I am hell-bent on shining a light on organizations who exhibit great ethical behavior, dedicate their business practice to putting their people first, and build amazing workplace cultures. But we have to grapple with the reality, which is even despite maybe the best of intentions, organizations run afoul of their two greatest stakeholder groups, their employees and their customers, when they fail to operate in an ethical fashion. So I hope this video today was a little bit useful. I'm going to put links in the description below to all of the resources that I share where you can go and dive a little bit deeper about Purism, the company, its initial founding, core values, ideology, how it got started, how it first started in hardware, then software, then moved into smartphone technology. It's an interesting case study on the importance of ethical business practice. So if you like the video, please like it. Let me know what you think. And by all means, if you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, that'll definitely help support me in my efforts to continue doing what I'm doing and get the message out to an even greater audience. Thanks so much for stopping in today at Chasing the Dream. Appreciate it.